The last stop diner isn't on any main road, just a lonely stretch of asphalt fading into the Nevada desert. The neon sign outside flickers, half burnt, casting a sickly green glow on the cracked pavement. Inside, the air hums with the tired drone of old refrigerators and the faint scent of stale coffee and desperation. I've been working the night shift here for 15 years now, serving up lukewarm comfort food to truckers, wanderers, and those who've simply run out of road. It wasn't my dream job, but life has a way of leading you down unexpected detours. When I first started, old man Tiber, the owner, slid a grease-stained placemat across the counter. On it, scrawled in faded red crayon, were 6 rules. "These ain't suggestions, kid," he rasped, his voice rough as sandpaper. "These are so you make it to morning." I thought he was just being dramatic. 15 years later, I know he wasn't. I've seen what happens when these rules are broken. I've been the one to mop up the messes. So let me share them with you, along with my own grim footnotes. Maybe you'll think I'm crazy, maybe you'll just shake your head. But if you ever find yourself out here, under a sky full of indifferent stars, and that flickering neon sign calls to you, you might want to keep these in mind. Rule number 1. Never serve the midnight special to anyone with a shadow that doesn't quite match. The midnight special is nothing more than burnt coffee and a dry slice of apple pie, but it's been on the menu since the diner opened. Most nights it's just a joke, a relic from a simpler time. But on nights when the desert wind howls like a hungry beast and the moon hangs low and bruised in the sky, you sometimes get customers who ask for it with the glint in their eyes that isn't quite right. It wasn't always a rule. I used to serve it to anyone who ordered it, no questions asked. Until that night, 3 years in. It was a Tuesday, a slow night, just the hum of the refrigerator for company. A man walked in, tall and lean, wearing a duster coat despite the heat. He took a seat at the far end of the counter, his back to the flickering neon. "Midnight special," he said, his voice flat, like stones skipping across water. I nodded, pouring the coffee, cutting the pie. As I turned to place it in front of him, I noticed it. His shadow. It was stretched long and thin behind him, but it moved slightly out of sync with his own subtle shifts. When he reached for the coffee cup, his shadow's hand lingered a fraction of a second too long in the air. My blood ran cold. I remembered Man Tiber's warning, something about things that ride the night winds. I swallowed hard. "Sorry, sir," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're all out of apple pie. Just sold the last slice." The man's head tilted, just a fraction. His shadow, however, snapped its head around to stare directly at me, its form rippling like heat haze. "No substitutions," he said, the flatness in his voice now a tangible threat. "I know you have what's needed." Just then, the bell above the door chimed, and a familiar figure walked in, Sheriff Brody, on his usual late-night patrol. The man in the duster stiffened. "Brody," he hissed, his voice a low growl. "You're a long way from your patrol car." Brody, a mountain of a man with eyes that had seen too much, just nodded. "Just passing through, friend. Thought I'd grab a coffee." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The man, the one with the unruly shadow, smiled then, but it was a chilling baring of teeth. "Another time," he said, his gaze sweeping over me. "The desert is vast, and there are many paths." He stood, and as he walked out, his shadow, for a fleeting moment, seemed to detach and then melt back into his form as he disappeared into the night. Brody took the man's vacated stool. "Coffee, black," he said, his hand hovering near his holstered gun. What was that all about? I poured his coffee, my hand still shaking. He ordered the midnight special. And his shadow, it wasn't right. Brody nodded slowly. "They're called echoes," he said. "Or sometimes, they call themselves wayfinders. They follow the unseen paths, looking for something they lost, or something they need to find for someone else. And the midnight special, it's what they use to anchor themselves to fully manifest." The pie, The coffee, it doesn't matter. It's the ritual. He paused, taking a long drink. You did good. If you'd served it, you wouldn't have just served a meal. You'd have served yourself up too. Since then, I check every shadow. I've had to refuse the midnight special only 4 other times, but each time, the shadow gave them away. They get angry, of course, but a quick call to Brody always sends them on their way. He never explains how he makes them leave, and I never ask. Some secrets are best left in the dark. One particular night stands out in my memory regarding the midnight special. It was a blistering August evening, the kind of heat that doesn't dissipate even after the sun has set. The diner was quiet, the air conditioning struggling against the oppressive temperature. A woman walked in, her movements fluid and graceful, like a dancer. Her red dress shimmered under the dim lights, and her hair was a cascade of dark curls. She was stunning, almost impossibly so, and completely out of place in our dusty establishment. She took a seat at the counter, her smile a warm, inviting curve. "The midnight special, please," she said, her voice like wind chimes. My instincts immediately fled. Too perfect, too enchanting. I glanced at the mirror behind the bar, and my blood ran cold. Her shadow, a dark, elongated silhouette against the wall, was reaching for me, its fingers stretching, yearning. It was longer than it should have been, almost touching my arm. And it was smiling, a wide, predatory smile that her actual face did not share. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We're all out of apple pie tonight." Her smile didn't falter. "Oh, that's quite all right. Perhaps just the coffee then." Her shadow, however, tightened, its form seeming to condense, the outstretched fingers twitching. I could almost feel a cold pressure on my skin. "No, I'm afraid we're out of the coffee too for the midnight special," I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. "The machine broke down just a moment ago." Her eyes, a striking emerald green, held mine. "Are you quite certain?" she asked, her voice losing some of its melodic quality, taking on a subtle edge. Her shadow's smile widened. It was unnerving, the disconnect between her beautiful face and the hungry malevolence of her reflection. Just as the tension became unbearable, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness outside, and Brody's patrol car pulled into the parking lot. The shadow behind her flickered, like a faulty projector. The woman sighed, a sound of subtle disappointment. "Such a shame," she said, her smile now a brittle mask. She rose gracefully. "Perhaps another time when your supplies are more abundant." As she walked towards the door, her shadow seemed to shrink, pulling back into itself. But for a fleeting moment, as she pushed open the door, I saw it. Her shadow twisted, turning its head back towards me, its eyes glowing with a faint, malevolent light, before vanishing completely as she stepped outside. Brody walked in, his gaze immediately scanning the room. "Everything all right, Sarah?" he asked, his eyes settling on me. I just nodded, a little too quickly. He looked at the empty stool where she had sat. "Another one?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded again. He sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "They're getting bolder," he muttered. "The veil thins in the summer heat, makes it easier for them to slip through." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. The image of that reaching, smiling shadow was enough. Rule number 2. If a customer asks for directions to a place that doesn't exist, offer them a glass of water and tell them the well is dry. We get all kinds of lost souls at the last stop diner. Some are just looking for a bathroom, others for a reason to keep driving. But sometimes, a customer will ask for directions to a town that vanished off the map decades ago, or a mythical canyon, or a place where the stars whisper names. The first time it happened, it was an old woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes wide with a feverish light. She wanted to know how to get to Solstice Ridge, where the first light touches the stones. I pulled out my map, tracing lines with my finger. "Never heard of it, ma'am," Are you sure you have the right name? She just smiled, a sweet, unsettling smile. Oh, it's there, just hidden. Are you saying you don't know the way? I shrugged. Sorry, ma'am. She stayed for another hour, just sipping her coffee, muttering to herself. When she finally left, I felt a strange lightness, like I'd almost forgotten something important. Tiber explained it the next morning. They're called seekers, he said, wiping down the counter. They're looking for answers, for places that hold power. And if you give them real directions, you become part of their journey. And their journeys never end well. That's when he wrote down rule number 2. Now, when someone asks for impossible directions, I offer them water. The well is dry, I say, and their eyes, the ones that held that feverish light, dim a little. They usually leave soon after. But one night, a young woman, her eyes like chipped turquoise, asked for the path to the whispering sands where the dreams go to die. I offered her water and told her the well is dry. She looked at me, a flicker of understanding in her gaze. It's not truly dry, is it? She whispered. Just dry for me. I just looked at her, and after a moment she nodded, a sad, knowing look on her face, and walked out into the night. I watched her go, a chill running down my spine. The next morning, a search party found her car abandoned, miles off any paved road, facing directly into the heart of the desert. She was gone. The desert never gives up its secrets easily. There was another time, not long after that, a man came in, smelling of dust and desperation. His clothes were rumpled, his hair disheveled, but his eyes held a strange, almost manic gleam. He ordered a coffee and then leaned across the counter, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I'm looking for the silent city, he said. They say it's hidden deep in the canyons, where the wind sings no songs. I felt that familiar chill. Sir, I'm afraid I don't know any place by that name. His eyes widened, and he gripped the counter, his knuckles white. But you must know, it's where the old ones sleep, where the knowledge of all ages is kept. His voice was rising now, a thin, reedy sound. I calmly reached for a glass and filled it with water. Here you go, sir. The well is dry. He stared at the water, his manic energy seeming to deflate. Dry? He murmured almost to himself, always dry. He took a long, slow drink, his gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond the diner's walls. He didn't say another word, just set the glass down and walked out, his shoulders slumped. A few days later, Brody stopped by for his usual coffee. Heard you had a seeker in here the other night, he said, stirring his mug. The one looking for the silent city. I nodded. Did he was found? Brody just shook his head. They never are. Not the ones who truly want to find it. The silent city, it's not a place for the living. It's where the void weavers go to die, to unravel their threads and become nothing. And if you give directions, you're essentially sending them to their unraveling. And sometimes, you get caught in the pull. He paused, his gaze distant. The well is dry. That's a good answer. It implies a lack, a void. What they're seeking is a kind of void. His words always held a deeper meaning, a glimpse into the strange currents that flowed beneath our ordinary world. Rule number 3. If the old jukebox in the corner starts playing the Lonesome Highway Blues on its own, turn off all the lights and lock the doors until the song ends. The jukebox is an ancient beast, its chrome peeling, its internal mechanisms a mystery held together by spit and prayer. Most nights, it sits silent, a forgotten relic. But every now and then, usually on the darkest, loneliest nights, it comes to life on its own, belting out the same mournful tune, the Lonesome Highway Blues.
The first time it happened, I was wiping down tables, humming to myself. Suddenly, the diner was filled with the wailing harmonica and a gravelly voice singing about endless roads and broken dreams. I jumped, spilling my rag. I walked over, thinking a customer had put in a coin, but the slot was empty. As the song played, a strange unease settled over the diner. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, and the hum of the refrigerators took on a sinister resonance. I felt like I wasn't alone. Then, a shadowy figure seemed to coalesce in the reflection of the diner window, just outside. It was vague, indistinct, but it moved, like a hungry mist. I froze. Man Tiber, who had been in the back, burst out, his face pale. He saw me staring at the window. "Lights off, doors locked now," he hissed, his voice raw with urgency. I scrambled, fumbling with the switches, throwing the deadbolt. The diner plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the jukebox, which continued to play its mournful tune. We stood there, in the oppressive silence, listening to the song. The shadowy figure outside pressed against the glass, its form wavering, almost solidifying. It stayed there, a silent sentinel, until the last note faded. Then, as if on cue, it dissolved into the night. "Those are the road ghosts," Man Tiber explained, his voice still shaky. "The ones who died out on that highway, lost and alone. The lonesome highway blues, it calls to them. It draws them in, gives them a path, however brief, back to the living. If you're visible, if the doors are open, they'll try to follow it. And you don't want them following you." I've learned to recognize this subtle shift in the air, the way the silence deepens just before that first mournful note. I move quickly now, turning off the lights, locking the doors, and waiting in the oppressive darkness until the song ends. I don't look at the windows anymore. I just listen and pray. One particular experience with the jukebox chills me to this day. It was a stormy night, the wind rattling the old windows and thunder echoing across the desert. The power flickered but held. Then, the distinct, mournful chords of The Lonesome Highway Blues started up. I immediately hit the lights, plunging the diner into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of the jukebox and the occasional flash of lightning outside. I fumbled with the locks, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. As the song reached its sorrowful chorus, I heard a faint scratching sound at the front door. Not a gentle tapping, but a persistent, deliberate scraping, as if something with sharp claws was trying to get in. I pressed myself against the counter, my breath held. Through the brief flashes of lightning, I could see a vague, distorted shape pressed against the glass. It wasn't human. It was too tall, too gaunt, its limbs seeming to stretch and contract. And then I saw them. Faint, glowing points of light where its eyes should have been, staring directly at me through the storm-streaked window. The scratching continued, growing more insistent, accompanied by a low, guttural moan that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. I squeezed my eyes shut, repeating Man Tiber's words in my head. "Don't want them following you. Don't want them following you." The song swelled, the harmonica wailing like a lost soul. The scratching intensified, sounding less like claws and more like desperate, clawing fingers. I could almost feel the cold seeping through the old glass. Then, as suddenly as it began, the song ended. The last note of the harmonica faded into the roar of the wind, and the scratching stopped. I slowly opened my eyes. The shape outside was gone. The only sound was the storm and the tired hum of the refrigerators. I remained frozen for a few more minutes before slowly, cautiously, turning the lights back on. The diner was empty, just as it had been before. But on the floor, directly in front of the locked door, was a small, dark smear. It looked like dried mud, but it had a faint, coppery smell. I didn't touch it. I just cleaned around it. Some things are best left undisturbed. Rule number 4. If a customer orders the last meal and offers a story as payment, listen intently, but never offer condolences or advice. It's a rare order, the last meal. There's no set menu for it. It's whatever the customer desires, no matter how outlandish. But the payment is always the same. A story, a confession, a memory, a warning. These are the enders, the ones who have come to the end of their road. Their journeys complete in ways we can barely comprehend. The first time, it was a weathered old cowboy, his eyes holding the wisdom of 1,000 sunsets. He ordered a perfectly cooked steak, rare, with a side of mashed potatoes. He ate slowly, deliberately, and then he looked at me. "I need to tell you about the desert's heart," he said, his voice raspy. He spoke of ancient things, of winds that carry whispers from forgotten times, of the ground beneath the diner being older than anything known. He spoke of a choice he had made, a bargain struck, and a debt finally paid. His story was fantastical, chilling, yet utterly compelling. I found myself leaning in, mesmerized. When he finished, he looked at me, his eyes full of a profound weariness. "And that's why," he said, "I'm finally at peace." I wanted to offer him some kind of comfort, a word of sympathy. But then I remembered man Tiber's rule: never offer condolences or advice. I just nodded, collected his plate. He smiled, a genuine smile this time, and simply vanished. One moment he was there. The next, the stool was empty. Man Tiber later explained that these people are finishing something. They're making peace, releasing a burden. If you try to comfort them, he said, you latch onto their ending. You get tangled in their threads. And sometimes, their ending becomes your beginning. And you don't want that kind of beginning. I've heard stories that would curdle your blood, tales of unspeakable horrors and impossible wonders. I've listened to confessions that spoke of unimaginable guilt and profound sacrifice. Each time I just listen, a silent witness. I've learned to keep my face neutral, my thoughts to myself, because these aren't just stories. They're the final acts of lives that exist on the fringes of reality, and it's best not to interfere with their last moments of peace. Another last meal experience that remains vivid in my mind was with a woman who looked no older than 30, but her eyes held an ancient sorrow. She asked for a single, perfectly ripe peach. It was the middle of winter, and peaches were impossible to find, but somehow one appeared, fresh and fragrant, from the back of our usually sparsely stocked kitchen. She ate it slowly, savoring each bite. "I have a story about a garden," she began, her voice soft, almost melodic. "A garden where time flows differently, where every flower holds a memory and every fruit holds a choice." She spoke of walking through this garden, meeting entities of light and shadow, of being offered a single seed. A seed of immense power, but also immense burden. She had taken the seed, nurtured it, and watched it grow into a tree that reached for the heavens. But the tree demanded a price, a piece of her, every day, every year. She had finally given it everything, leaving nothing but herself, hollowed out but free. "And now," she concluded, her eyes fixed on me, "the tree has blossomed for the final time. And I am done."
I walked back out, my hands trembling slightly. "Hey guys," I said, forcing a cheerful tone. "On the house tonight, a slice of our famous apple pie. For the journey." Gus looked at me, surprised. "Journey? I'm just headed to Reno." I just smiled, a little too widely. In the mirror, the man in the mirror smiled too, a chilling, wide grin that stretched impossibly far across his shadowed face. He nodded slowly, as if in agreement. Gus ate the pie, oblivious. When he stood to leave, the man in the mirror remained, staring at me, his smile unwavering. Then, as Gus walked out the door, the man in the mirror simply faded, like smoke in a strong wind. Man Tiber later explained it that night. The man in the mirror, he's a harbinger. He appears when someone is about to embark on a journey they don't know they're on, a journey that will take them far from here, perhaps forever. The pie, it's a blessing, a protection. It acknowledges the journey without inviting its true nature. If you don't acknowledge it, he'll try to guide them, and his guidance is never gentle. I've seen the man in the mirror only 3 other times since then. Each time I offer the pie, and each time I see that chilling, knowing smile in the reflection. I never know what kind of journey those customers are on, but I know it's one I never want to take. The most unsettling encounter with the man in the mirror involved a young woman, no older than myself, who came in late one night. She was dressed in bright, colorful clothes, and she hummed a cheerful tune as she ordered a milkshake. She seemed full of life, a vibrant splash of color in our drab diner. But when I glanced at the mirror, he was there, standing directly behind her, his shadowed face tilted, as if studying her. And he was reaching. His reflected hand, long and skeletal, was gently touching the back of her head, right where her hair was pulled into a ponytail. She didn't react, just kept humming. My stomach twisted into knots. This was different, more direct. I needed to act quickly. I walked to the back, my voice barely a whisper. "Man, Tiber," I choked out. "He's touching her." "The Harbinger." Man Tiber looked at the mirror, his face paling. "The touch, that means he's already chosen her. We need to be quick." He grabbed a fresh slice of apple pie and pressed it into my hand. "Offer it. And this time, look him in the eye when you say it." I walked back out, my heart pounding. The man in the mirror was still there, his reflected hand still resting on her head. I forced a smile, approaching her. "On the house tonight, ma'am," I said, my voice wavering slightly. "A slice of our famous apple pie. For the journey." As I extended the plate, I deliberately met the gaze of the man in the mirror in the glass. His shadowed eyes seemed to glow, and his smile, already wide, stretched further, revealing something dark and impossibly deep behind it. A ripple went through his form, like water disturbed. The young woman looked up, surprised, but took the pie. "Oh, thank you," she said, her voice light. "That's so kind." She took a bite, completely oblivious. In the mirror, the man in the mirror slowly withdrew his hand. He lowered his gaze to the pie, then back to me. His eyes, though still shadowed, held a flicker of something, almost like recognition or perhaps a grudging respect. Then he simply tilted his head, a gesture of silent acknowledgement, and dissolved from the reflection. The young woman finished her pie, thanked me again, and left. She seemed perfectly normal. But a few days later, Brody came in, looking tired. "Did you see that girl, the one in the bright clothes from a few nights ago?" he asked, without preamble. I nodded, my throat tight. "She walked into the desert," he said, his voice flat. "Just kept walking. Left her car, her phone, everything. Just walked. No tracks found after a mile or so. Vanished." He shook his head. "They're calling it a missing person, but I know better. That was a journey." He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I just looked away, my gaze fixed on the empty pie case. The man in the mirror had gotten his due in his own way, and I knew, with a terrible certainty, that some journeys cannot be stopped, only acknowledged. So there you have them, the 6 rules that keep the Last Stop Diner running, and me alive. I have followed them faithfully for 15 years, through quiet nights and the kind of nights that make your hair stand on end. And I don't see any reason to stop now. The desert is a harsh mistress, full of forgotten roads and things that lurk in the shadows. But here, at the Last Stop Diner, we try to make it to morning. What's your favorite kind of pie? Just curious. My throat tightened. The urge to say something, anything, was overwhelming. To tell her I was sorry, to offer a kind word. But I held back, gripping the edge of the counter. I just nodded, my expression carefully blank. She smiled a faint, ethereal smile, and then, like the cowboy before her, she simply ceased to be. The peach pit lay on the plate, a mundane object left by an impossible departure. Man Tiber later that week found me polishing silverware, lost in thought. "She was a gardener of echoes," he murmured, without me even telling him about her. "They cultivate memories, experiences, sometimes even other lives, in places beyond our understanding. The peach, it was the fruit of her last harvest, and she gave it to herself." He looked at me, his gaze sharp. "You did well to say nothing. If you had, that garden's roots might have reached for you." The thought sent a shiver down my spine. The desert holds more than just sand and rocks. It holds stories, and some stories are best left untold and certainly not intervened with. Rule number 5. If the radio starts playing static and a child's voice whispers your name, do not respond. Unplug the radio immediately. The old radio behind the counter is a constant companion, playing country music and local news. But sometimes, usually in the dead of night, the music cuts out, replaced by a harsh, grating static. And then, through the hiss, a child's voice, soft and pleading, whispers my name. The first time, I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. It was just after 2 a.m. and the diner was empty. "Sarah," the voice whispered, sweet and clear despite the static. "Sarah, can you hear me?" My hand instinctively reached for the radio, ready to turn up the volume to answer. But then I remembered Tiber's trembling hand as he'd written this rule. Do not respond. Unplug immediately. My fingers fumbled for the plug, tearing it from the wall. The static died, and the diner was plunged into an unnerving silence. Tiber later explained it the next morning, his face etched with grim memories. "They're called the lost children," he said. "They wander the unseen spaces, looking for a way back, for someone to lead them home. They know your name because they know what you fear, what you desire. And if you answer, you open a door, and they will try to walk through it. And they won't be alone." I've heard that voice 5 times since then. Each time, it whispers my name, sometimes with a sob, sometimes with a playful giggle, sometimes with a desperate plea. Each time, I fight the urge to respond, to ask who they are, to offer comfort. But I force my hand to the plug, yanking it from the wall. Because I've seen the glint in Tiber's eyes when he talks about them, the deep-seated fear, and I know that some connections are best left severed. The most terrifying encounter with the lost children happened during a particularly fierce dust storm. The diner was dark, the power out, and only the emergency lanterns cast flickering light. A family had taken shelter, a young couple and their terrified daughter, maybe 7 years old, named Lily. She was clutching a worn teddy bear, her eyes wide with fear. The wind howled outside, sounding like 100 hungry voices. That's when the radio, despite being unplugged from the wall outlet, crackled to life. A faint, barely audible static filled the air. My blood ran cold. I knew with the certainty that chilled me to the bone what was coming. Then through the static, a child's voice, sweet and deceptively innocent, whispered, "Lily, why are you hiding?" Lily, who had been huddled against her mother, stiffened. Her head tilted, as if listening to something only she could hear. "She's calling for me," Lily whispered, her voice strangely flat, devoid of emotion. Her parents exchanged worried glances. "Honey, no one's calling," her father said gently. But Lily started to rise, her movements stiff, puppet-like. "She wants me to play. She said she has a special game." "Lily, sit down," her mother pleaded, reaching for her hand. Lily pulled away with surprising force, her eyes now glazed over, fixed on the radio. "She's waiting. She found me." The voice from the radio, now clearer, sweeter, called out again, "Lily, come and play with us." Panic flared in me. The radio was still unplugged. This wasn't just a broadcast, it was something far more insidious. I knew I had to break the connection, even if the plug was useless. Thinking quickly, I grabbed a heavy metal spatula from the counter and with all my might, slammed it down on the radio, crushing its casing. The static shrieked, a high, piercing sound, and then died completely. The effect was immediate. Lily gasped, her body going limp. She blinked, her eyes clearing, and looked around in confusion. "Mommy, what happened?" "My head hurts." Her parents, pale and shaken, embraced her tightly. Tiber emerged from the back, his face grim. He looked at the shattered radio, then at Lily. "The weavers of silence," he muttered. "They lure the innocent. They weave illusions into their minds, threads of longing." "You did well, Sarah." "Very well." He then produced a small silver locket from his pocket and pressed it into Lily's hand, instructing her parents to keep it with her always. "It helps to ground them," he explained, "against the pull of the unseen." The family left as soon as the storm broke, their gratitude evident in their tearful farewells. But as they drove away, I heard Lily's faint voice from the car. "Mummy, who was that other little girl who wanted me to play?" Her mother just shushed her gently. I knew then that some echoes linger, even after the connection is severed. And I know I will never ever answer a child's voice from that radio again. Rule number 6. If you see the man in the mirror standing behind a customer, offer the customer a free slice of pie and say, "For the journey." This one seems the most absurd, the stuff of campfire tales. A reflection that isn't quite right. But then you work enough nights out here, and you start to believe in things you never thought possible. The man in the mirror isn't a ghost, not exactly. He's something else. It was a cold, blustery night last winter. A trucker, a burly man named Gus, was sitting at the counter, nursing a coffee. As I walked by, I happened to glance at the mirror behind the bar, the long, dusty rectangle that reflects the diner. And there he was. Behind Gus, perfectly reflected, stood a tall, thin figure in an old-fashioned suit, his face obscured by shadow. But Gus himself was alone. The man in the mirror was watching me, his head tilted slightly, as if curious. A chill ran down my spine. I swallowed hard, trying to act normal. I went to the back, my heart pounding. "Man, Tiber," I whispered. I think I just saw the man in the mirror." He looked up, his eyes immediately going to the reflection of Gus in the mirror. He saw him too. "Pie," he mouthed. "For the journey."